We were talking in the last lesson about the stone discovered in Sweden and the traumatic events of the famine and the earthquake that were recorded on that stone. They could have shaped the myth of Ragnarok, which is about the great winter which led to the end of civilization. So this is about Norse mythology, and Norse is a Norse folk tale. There was a myth of Ragnarok, which is about the great winter that led to the end of civilization. So if somebody studies these folk tales very seriously, then you can see how relevant they are even today, how we might be heading towards wiping out our civilization if we do not take note of the signs of climate impact. Thus, we can see that folk tales, myths and fables, etc. record extreme climate events of the past and warn of future recurrences. Over time, particularly post-20th century, these themes grew increasingly focused on explicit environmental issues, paralleling humanity's growing awareness of ecological crisis and climate change. But as components of eco-spirituality, they are storehouses of ancient wisdom about land. So, the 20th century, the post-20th century, the focus on environmental issue continued to grow, and people became more and more aware of ecological crisis and climate change. And uh, as eco-spirituality tells us that these folk tales and all are storehouses of ancient wisdom, and they can tell us a lot about mitigating climate change. So let's talk about some stories, some literature published in the late 19th century and the early 20th centuries. These were short stories by Jack London and Rudyard Kipling, often portraying humans in close contact with natural environments, emphasizing the themes of survival, exploration, and respect for the wild. So, Jack London's classic story, White Fang, is very important. It's about a wolf that comes from the jungles or from the wildernesses in the polar regions and somewhere in northern Canada, and how it is tamed and um, it becomes a dog in the sledges that they use to carry cargo across the snow. So this thing about the wild environments and the idea of surviving in them, these ideas are there in this book. And Rudyard Kipling also portrays this um, idea of respect for the wild, themes of survival in the wild and the exploration of these wildernesses. And as we know, uh, for instance, Alaska is there. These polar regions, they are extremely cold. So the wilderness there is of a different kind, and the animal life is also of a different kind. So human beings there learn to live to respect them and respect the weather, and they live in synchronicity with the patterns of the weather, and have to, you know, survive with whatever food they can find. So it's a different kind of climate and setup, and there's a respect for the wild nature. These narratives did not address environmental issues as we understand them today, but instead captured the awe and unpredictability of nature after revealing a sense of humility in the face of its might. So, when the story of White Fang was there, this dog, which was actually a wolf that came from the wilderness, it is shown to have character, it is shown to have goodness of heart, and it is shown how it suffers at the hand of its human owners till in the end it finds its release back into the forest or wildernesses. So we can see that the interaction between human beings and nature is there in all these works. Jack London's work To Build a Fire. London portrayed the raw, unforgiving landscape of Yukon Territory. The protagonist struggle against freezing temperatures and isolation serves as a potent example of human vulnerability in nature, capturing the respect and sometimes fear humans had for the wild. So, as I already mentioned, these northern regions, these polar regions, this Yukon territory, it has freezing temperatures, and human beings are seen against this backdrop, learning to survive. London's work reflects the environmental conditions of his time, focusing on survival rather than environmental responsibility. So there is a fight to survive as far as the dogs or the wolves are concerned, and between human beings also there's a fight to survive. So environmental responsibility is not focused on as much as survival against a wild nature is there. His stories emphasized how humans are a part of nature rather than its conquerors, subtly highlighting humanity's dependence on and subjugation to natural forces. So, his stories uh, show human beings as being dependent on nature and being subjugated by natural forces, and there is the understanding that humans are a part of nature. So, this kind of idea or belief also became a part of climate stories later on. Another interesting book is by Rudyard Kipling, The Jungle Book. Now, this book is really familiar for children. It's a pleasure to read. It has been animated in a form of animated film, and the characters are very attractive for children. But if we just think of the basic book, what it was about the complex world of nature with its own codes, hierarchies, and relationships almost independent of human influence. And we can see the boy Mowgli who comes to the jungle for the first time, who is a baby and who's adopted by the animals. How there's a distance between the human and the animal world, and how gradually he has to temper himself, he has to learn the codes of this jungle world. The animals don't have to learn the codes of humanity. He has to adapt to their codes of humanity, their jungle life, the way they eat, and their sense of justice is there, their sense of honesty and discipline, and there's a struggle between good and evil too. So this is the success of this book, and it gives a respect to nature, and it shows how nature is superior to the human world, because the human child does not have the skills that these animals have, whether it's the tiger or the panther or the monkeys. The energy that they have, the swiftness, the smartness, the human child doesn't have any of them. And we also know that it was an Indian cultural background that the book is dealing with. Kipling's work introduced readers to Indian landscapes and animal life, often anthropomorphizing animals to provide insight into the natural world. So, so the cartoons, the Disney cartoons have, the Disney world has cashed on these elements of this book, and thus the animation movie is very successful. Once more, his stories are not so much about environmental responsibility. They are more about human interaction with nature on a respectful, observational level, highlighting the mystery and the beauty of the wild. And so the natural world is presented as a living entity. So even before this period of the early 20th century, we had the 19th century and the 18th century. In the Romantic period, around 1850, there was this idea, as Romantics believed, that there was a soul stirring in nature, that nature was a moralist and a guide. So, I suppose, influenced by those very ideas, uh, there were many works which talked about nature or the natural world as a living entity with its own set of rules, wonders, and dangers. So, there were a lot of books published at that time that talked about exploration of natural worlds, and many books for children too, which talked about um, the intelligent and living world of nature. There was a very influential and important book during the uh, and around the 19th century, Water Babies. The Water Babies was about marine life, about life of nature in the rivers and the sea. And this book, it talks about the beauty, the wonder, and the magic of this marine life, and which is independent of the human world. And the human world, when it comes in contact, it has to surrender to this natural world. So the Water Babies are kind of children who have suffered from the oppression of society, and they have tried to take refuge in the river, and the river has pulled them in and turned them into a different kind of creature called the Water Babies, and they have a rich and fulfilling life. So the main protagonist in this story is this little boy who is made to work very hard. He's poor, he has to work very hard in a house. He's always bullied, he's mistreated because he's poor. But once he enters the river, he becomes a water baby, and he uh, gets to know a whole new world in the marine world. So this was a very successful book, and it talked about nature as a living world full of beauties and wonders, its own discipline, its own moral system, its own political system. While not overtly environmentalist by modern standard, they planted seeds for viewing nature as more than just a backdrop, as a resource, but as a particular um, human experience, as an active participant in the human experience. So, nature was um, not just in the backdrop now, it was an active participant in the human experience. It was just as living as human beings were, but it was uh, morally superior to human beings and capable of instructing them, capable of giving them wisdom, how to live life. So it was a place of purity, which was quite a contrast to the corruption in the human world. So, as I said, there are many legends and folk tales around the world. There's one that is very famous in West Bengal, the legend of Bon Bibi. Now, Bon Bibi is a legendary goddess of the Sundarbans forest in West Bengal. So, Amitav Ghosh has written his book, The Jungle Nama, and the story talks about how she protects the beings of the forest. She protects the insects, the trees, the animals and the birds, and she protects them from poachers and from enemies. So she helps all those who ask for her help. She's a revered figure, and in reality, in this Sundarbans, uh, irrespective of religion, everybody believes in Bon Bibi, whether they are Hindu or whether they are Muslim or whatever the religion they follow. They believe that she is the keeper of the forest, she is the owner of the forest, and she punishes those who dare to destroy and raid the forest. So, in his book, Amitabh Ghosh has brought it out very well in Jungle Nama. There are so many nature stories around the world, and when nature has been used as a mode of instruction, so we know that they are short stories, they are fables. So, these fables use animals to convey certain ideals and certain elements of moral behavior. So, I came across this research paper by Madhu Sharma, in which she says that there are themes of climate conservation in the Panchatantra and in Aesop's fables. So, in her paper, The Panchatantra and Aesop's Fables, she has discovered the themes of the need for nature conservation, the need for nature conservation, and the themes of the relationship between humans and nature in these two texts. She quotes Ruckert 16 thus: in both these texts, the natural world is portrayed as inferior, marginalized, silenced, and pushed into a backdrop against which the rational human subject struts upon. So, in these stories, she feels that nature is pushed against the background, it is silent, it is marginalized, and it's like animals are used to convey something, but they don't have an individuality of their own. So, in other words, through these stories, the pain and the suffering of nature is hinted at as a way to awaken humans. So, the Panchatantra was so important, it was translated into Persian also, went round the world, and it was essential to read this to kids so they may learn morals. But it was not very deep as far as talking about respect for environment was concerned. And so the torture or the suffering or the silence or the muteness of nature talks about the need to give nature importance. All around India too, in the north, south, east, west, we have a variety of regions, a variety of communities, religions, languages, cultures, and the soil quality uh, and the seasonal events vary in different locations in India. So, Amit Kumar Srivastav has mentioned folklore related to drought in India in his book. So, I have put that in the references. He has focused on water scarcity in different parts of India and how it is reflected in folklore. So, there must be folklore in all those places that uh, suffer from some kind of extreme climate event related to temperature or related to wind or related to water. So, he has focused on the idea of water scarcity in different parts of India and how it is reflected in folklore. He refers to folk tales and folklore as a medium of intergenerational transfer of knowledge. As we mentioned earlier, that folklore or folk tales are wisdom transmitted orally from one generation to another. And so, these folklores, these folk tales are all storehouses of wisdom passed on orally from one generation to another. And in modern times, they are used in written stories, they are used in movies, they frame movies and stories about climate change. They are used by climate fiction and by science fiction too. He quotes Paul Raj and Andharia 2015 saying that rituals, proverbs and other oral traditions are treasures of indigenous knowledge of climate change and disaster prediction, and they have helped tribal communities to cope with drought and flood situations in Rajasthan. So, he says that these are a wealth of indigenous knowledge related to climate disaster and climate change and the prediction of it. And the tribal communities have a way of coping with drought and flood in situations in Rajasthan. I mentioned in one of the earlier lessons also how the Australian government has given land and forest to natives because they know how to deal with forest fires. So, it seems humanity today has lost touch with ancient wisdom, the ancient relationship with nature, and therefore it is a loss how to address the prevailing issues today. So, humanity today is at a loss how to cope with climate disaster and climate change issues, which have happened off and on in the past, and people, as they have expressed in the folklore and legends and such stories, knew ways of coping with them, knew how to maintain the fertility of the land, knew how to maintain a regular crop of anything, any food according to seasons. There was a time when there was no AI and there was not much industry and technology to help them along. So they were expert in reading the signs of the weather, the changes of the weather, the signals of the changing climate. They were good at that. In ancient times, there used to be no electronic or computing systems to guide ships at sea. So, they had learned to navigate by observing the birds, the stars, the skies, the speed of the wind. So, they had a natural wisdom that had been inbuilt because of their connection with nature. But today, as we as we lose connection with nature and we become more and more obsessed with profit, and we become slaves to technology, we tend to lose our way. Much like we hear about the honeybees, where they are mobile towers, the honeybees lose their way to the hives. So, we are also like that. So we lose the way to reality, way to wholeness, to completeness, as the great psychiatrist Jung said that wholeness is the aim of human life, to become whole, to become complete in personality. And when that wholeness is not there, when the personality is splintered, like there is a division between humans and nature, then there is a split, and then there are all kinds of mental problems that come in. So there was a wholeness as revealed by these folk tales, that human beings lived in good relationship to the land, and they they could predict weather changes very easily. So these folk tales are filled with wisdom and with warnings too. He quotes from Sankal et al. 2016 that farmers of Bundelkhand strongly believe that after reciting Ramcharitmanas there will be rain. So this belongs to Asian folklore or Asian religious beliefs, whether it's Japan or China or India. There are prayers for rain. So and then he also comments on the Indian people thus, that this folklore is rooted in spirituality, and the essential spirituality of the Indian people, that is the thing that has been their defense all throughout history. Even Muhammad Iqbal, when he talks about the difference between the East and West, very interestingly, he says that the East is a place of heart and soul and emotions, and the West is the place of intellect, where emotions and heart, they do not count. So this spirituality, this feeling of heart, this sense of emotion, this has always been there in Indian people. And he quotes, the history has shown that India and its cultural traditions survived to constant invasions by people or machines and natural disasters. So it is this spiritual strength, the wholeness within oneself, that helps one survive, and that is the feeling of being connected with nature, that has helped them survive numerous natural disasters, numerous invasions. So that's what Iqbal also talks about, that wholeness of self, that completeness of self, that spiritual strength within one is important if one wants to be safe from all kinds of dangers, all kinds of problems. And he also says that where the West is purely intellectual and technologically very advanced, they miss out on what belongs to the East. So there, uh, it's moving away gradually from the wholeness that is given by the earth, by the emotions, and so they are moving away from that, which is creating a whole lot of problems. So in this way, in India, in Asia, the heart, emotions, rituals, faith, belief in the spiritual quality of nature was always very important. And when we leave these traditions behind and we adopt the Western system of being cold and intellectual and critical and disbelieving in all these things, then there is surely trouble coming. It splinters the personality, and it also creates something called climate change. It creates grave impacts that will sort of manifest critically in the future. So I hope from these stories that we considered, from these folk tales, it will be clear that ancient wisdom that comes to us through folk tales and myths and legends, it is very valuable today, and it has some lessons for us to learn how to mitigate climate change impact. So we'll stop here and we'll continue in the next lesson. I hope you found this new topic interesting and you can learn something from this. Thank you.